Welcome to Framework, the podcast that makes the NIST cybersecurity framework practical, engaging, and accessible. Whether you're a cybersecurity professional, business leader, or simply curious about how organizations defend against cyber threats, this series is for you. This podcast is inspired by a comprehensive guide to the NIST Cybersecurity Framework 2.0, a best-selling resource written by cybersecurity expert Dr. Jason Edwards and trusted by professionals worldwide. In each episode, we'll leverage a few insights from Jason's extensive book to dive deep into CSF 2.0, unpacking every function, category, and subcategory with real-world applications you can immediately use. If you're enjoying this episode and want to learn more, head over to cyberauthor.me to grab your copy of the book and access additional resources to enhance your cybersecurity journey. You can also visit baremetalcyber.com, where over 2 million people last year explored expert insights, articles, and practical tools across a wide range of cybersecurity topics. GV.SC-01, Building a Supply Chain Risk Management Program. GV.SC-01 ensures that organizations develop, implement, and maintain a structured supply chain risk management program to identify, assess, and mitigate risks associated with third-party vendors, suppliers, and external partners. This subcategory belongs to the govern function within the National Institute of Standards and Technology Cybersecurity Framework, version 2.0, emphasizing that cybersecurity risks extend beyond an organization's internal infrastructure and must be addressed across the entire supply chain to prevent disruptions, data breaches, and operational failures. Without a structured supply chain risk management program, organizations risk exposure to cyber threats originating from unverified vendors, supply chain disruptions caused by security incidents, and regulatory non-compliance due to inadequate third-party security controls. A robust supply chain risk management program ensures that organizations evaluate the security posture of their suppliers, establish risk mitigation strategies, and implement security requirements that extend to all external business partners. A structured approach to supply chain security allows organizations to minimize the risk of third-party cyber incidents, ensure business continuity in the event of supply chain disruptions, and strengthen overall security governance. Organizations that establish supply chain security policies, enforce third-party security compliance frameworks, and integrate real-time risk assessments into vendor selection and monitoring processes improve their ability to detect, prevent, and respond to supply chain cyber threats effectively. Multiple stakeholders play a role in supply chain risk management. Executive leadership and procurement teams are responsible for setting supply chain security policies, defining vendor risk assessment criteria, and ensuring that supply chain security is aligned with business objectives. Cybersecurity and risk management teams conduct security evaluations of third-party vendors, monitor supply chain cybersecurity risks, and implement security measures to reduce exposure to supply chain threats. Legal and compliance officers ensure that supply chain risk management aligns with industry regulations, contractual security obligations, and national security standards, reducing liability and compliance risks. A supply chain risk management program is established through structured risk assessment methodologies, continuous third-party security monitoring, and enforcement of cybersecurity best practices across supply chain networks. This includes developing standardized vendor security assessments, implementing contractual security obligations for third-party vendors, and integrating supply chain cybersecurity into enterprise-wide risk management strategies. Organizations that fail to implement a structured supply chain risk management program risk being vulnerable to third-party security breaches, experiencing operational disruptions caused by vendor security failures, and facing financial and reputational damage due to supply chain cyber incidents. Several key terms define supply chain risk management and its role in cybersecurity governance. Third-party risk management, TPRM, ensures that organizations assess and mitigate cybersecurity risks associated with external vendors, suppliers, and service providers. Vendor risk assessment involves evaluating the security posture of third-party vendors before onboarding and throughout the vendor life. Security contractual obligations require organizations to define cybersecurity requirements within vendor agreements to ensure compliance with security policies and regulations. Continuous supply chain monitoring enables organizations to track security threats related to third-party vendors in real time, ensuring rapid response to potential risks. Resilience planning ensures that organizations develop contingency strategies to address supply chain disruptions caused by cyber threats, natural disasters, or geopolitical risks. Challenges in building a supply chain risk management program often lead to incomplete third-party security oversight, weak vendor risk management policies, and failure to enforce supply chain cybersecurity requirements effectively. One common issue is lack of visibility into supply chain cybersecurity risks, where organizations fail to track security threats originating from third-party vendors and suppliers, leaving them vulnerable to supply chain attacks. Another issue is inconsistent enforcement of security requirements across suppliers, where some vendors comply with security policies while others lack security controls, creating weak points in the supply chain. Some organizations mistakenly believe that supply chain risk management is solely the responsibility of procurement teams, without recognizing that cybersecurity teams must play an active role in supply chain security governance. When organizations build a structured supply chain risk management program, they improve security resilience, enhance third-party security compliance, and reduce exposure to supply chain cyber threats. A structured supply chain security framework ensures that security policies are consistently applied across all vendors, supplier risk assessments are standardized, and supply chain cybersecurity governance is integrated into enterprise-wide security strategies. Organizations that implement structured third-party risk assessment frameworks, enforce vendor security compliance standards, and continuously monitor supply chain security risks develop a comprehensive cybersecurity governance model that strengthens resilience against supply chain threats and improves overall security posture. Organizations that fail to establish a structured supply chain risk management program face significant cybersecurity, operational, and compliance risks. Without a formalized approach, organizations cannot effectively assess vendor security risks, leading to unchecked vulnerabilities across third-party suppliers, cloud service providers, and software vendors. A common issue is lack of security transparency among third-party vendors, where organizations fail to verify the cybersecurity posture of suppliers, increasing the likelihood of data breaches, unauthorized access, and compromised software supply chains. Another major challenge is delayed response to supply chain cyber incidents, where organizations do not have real-time monitoring mechanisms to detect or respond to third-party security failures, leaving critical business operations exposed to disruptions. By developing a structured supply chain risk management program, organizations ensure that all external vendors and partners adhere to cybersecurity best practices, reducing the risk of third-party cyber threats and strengthening supply chain security resilience. A well-defined supply chain security strategy enhances regulatory compliance, improves business continuity, and ensures that organizations proactively manage vendor security risks. Organizations that establish standardized vendor security assessments, enforce cybersecurity compliance frameworks for third-party vendors, and integrate supply chain security into enterprise-wide risk management models improve their ability to detect, prevent, and mitigate supply chain cyber risks efficiently. At the partial tier, organizations lack a formal supply chain risk management program, leading to ad hoc vendor security evaluations, minimal enforcement of cybersecurity policies for third-party suppliers, and inconsistent security controls across the supply chain. Supply chain cybersecurity is handled reactively, with organizations only addressing third-party security risks after a breach or compliance issue occurs. A small business at this level may rely on vendors without conducting security assessments, leading to potential security breaches caused by weak third-party security controls. At the risk-informed tier, organizations begin to develop structured vendor risk assessment processes, ensuring that security requirements are incorporated into procurement policies and third-party risk evaluations. However, cybersecurity risk assessments for vendors may still be inconsistent, with security oversight limited to high-risk suppliers, while smaller vendors remain unassessed. A mid-sized financial services company at this level may conduct cybersecurity risk assessments for major cloud service providers but fail to evaluate security risks associated with smaller software vendors or data processing partners. At the repeatable tier, organizations implement a fully structured supply chain risk management framework, ensuring that vendor security policies, compliance requirements, and risk assessments are standardized across all suppliers and third-party service providers. Supply chain security governance is formalized with leadership actively involved in reviewing vendor security performance and enforcing continuous supplier security monitoring. A healthcare organization at this stage may require all medical equipment suppliers and cloud-based electronic health record providers to adhere to standardized cybersecurity policies, conduct regular third-party security audits, and enforce encryption protocols for sensitive patient data. At the adaptive tier, organizations employ AI-driven supply chain security monitoring, predictive vendor risk analytics, and automated third-party compliance tracking to dynamically assess supplier security risks in real time and ensure rapid response to emerging supply chain threats. Supply chain risk management is fully integrated into enterprise-wide cybersecurity governance, ensuring that vendor security policies, supplier risk assessments, and third-party security compliance remain continuously optimized. A global e-commerce company at this level may use AI-powered security monitoring tools to detect anomalies in supplier networks, leverage blockchain-based supply chain integrity validation, and enforce real-time security risk assessments for all third-party. Building a supply chain risk management program aligns with multiple controls in the National Institute of Standards and Technology, Special Publication 800-53, ensuring that organizations implement structured supply chain cybersecurity governance frameworks and continuous vendor security risk assessment models. One key control is SA-12 Supply Chain Risk Management, which requires organizations to establish formal supply chain security policies, enforce third-party cybersecurity security compliance requirements, and continuously monitor vendor risk exposure. A global manufacturing firm implementing this control may require all suppliers to meet defined cybersecurity standards, conduct annual third-party security audits, and implement secure data sharing protocols between suppliers and internal systems. Another key control is SR-3 Third-Party Risk Assessment, which mandates that organizations evaluate the cybersecurity posture of external vendors, ensuring that third-party service providers adhere to the organization's security policies and risk management standards. A financial institution implementing this control may develop a standardized vendor risk assessment framework that scores suppliers based on cybersecurity maturity, compliance status, and historical incident data, ensuring that all vendors meet security policy requirements before being onboarded. Supply chain risk management also aligns with SR-7 third-party security monitoring, which requires organizations to implement continuous monitoring mechanisms to track vendor cybersecurity compliance, detect supply chain security threats, and respond proactively to third-party risks. This control ensures that organizations maintain real-time visibility into supply chain cybersecurity risks, enabling them to identify vendor security weaknesses before they lead to security incidents. A global cloud services provider implementing this control may establish automated vendor risk monitoring dashboards, AI-driven supply chain threat detection models, and real-time compliance tracking systems to ensure ongoing third-party cybersecurity assurance. These controls can be adapted based on organizational size, industry, and cybersecurity maturity. A small business may implement basic supply chain risk management procedures, ensuring that vendors undergo security assessments before being onboarded and agree to contractual cybersecurity policies that align with business security requirements. A large enterprise may deploy automated vendor risk scoring tools, predictive supply chain security modeling, and blockchain-based supply chain integrity verification mechanisms to ensure that supply chain cybersecurity governance evolves dynamically based on emerging threats. Organizations in highly regulated industries such as financial services, government contracting, and healthcare may require quarterly third-party security audits, executive-led vendor security governance committees, and regulatory-driven third-party cybersecurity benchmarking to ensure compliance with national and industry-specific supply chain security standards. Auditors assess supply chain risk management programs by reviewing whether organizations have structured, documented, and continuously updated vendor security risk assessment frameworks. They evaluate whether organizations implement structured third-party cybersecurity governance policies, enforce continuous vendor security monitoring mechanisms, and integrate supply chain risk management into enterprise-wide cybersecurity programs. If an organization fails to establish a structured supply chain risk management program, auditors may issue findings highlighting gaps in third-party security oversight, weak vendor security compliance enforcement, and failure to align supply chain cybersecurity governance with evolving regulatory requirements. To verify compliance, auditors seek specific types of evidence. Vendor risk assessment reports and structured supplier security benchmarking documentation demonstrate that organizations formally define and enforce structured third-party security risk evaluation frameworks. Third-party compliance tracking records and supply chain cybersecurity audit reports provide insights into whether organizations proactively monitor vendor security, compliance, and refine supply chain security policies based on real-time threat intelligence. Incident response evaluations related to supply chain security breaches and third-party security incident reports show whether organizations effectively track vendor cybersecurity incidents, ensuring that supply chain cybersecurity risks remain continuously managed. A compliance success scenario could involve a global pharmaceutical company that undergoes an audit and provides evidence that supply chain risk management policies are fully integrated into enterprise cybersecurity governance, ensuring that vendor risk assessments occur regularly, third-party security compliance frameworks are continuously refined, and supply chain cybersecurity monitoring remains proactive. Auditors confirm that supply chain cybersecurity risks are continuously assessed, vendor security compliance is actively enforced, and supply chain security governance aligns with national and international cybersecurity regulations. In contrast, an organization that fails to conduct structured vendor security evaluations, neglects third-party security compliance monitoring, or lacks formalized supply chain cybersecurity governance frameworks may receive audit findings for poor supply chain risk management, weak vendor security compliance enforcement, and failure to integrate supply chain cybersecurity oversight into enterprise risk governance. Organizations face multiple barriers in ensuring that supply chain risk management programs are effectively developed and maintained. One major challenge is lack of visibility into third-party security risks, where organizations fail to track the cybersecurity posture of vendors, leading to security gaps that cybercriminals can exploit through supply chain attacks. Another challenge is inconsistent enforcement of vendor security requirements, where some suppliers adhere to strict security controls while others lack formal security policies, creating vulnerabilities within the supply chain. A final challenge is over-reliance on manual third-party risk assessment processes, where organizations lack automation in vendor security evaluations, making it difficult to scale supply chain cybersecurity governance across multiple suppliers and external partners. Organizations can overcome these barriers by developing structured supply chain risk assessment models, ensuring that vendor security policies are continuously refined based on evolving cyber threats, and integrating third-party risk monitoring into enterprise-wide security governance frameworks. Investing in automated vendor security, compliance tracking tools, predictive third-party risk assessment platforms, and AI-driven supply chain security analytics ensures that organizations dynamically assess, monitor, and refine supply chain cybersecurity strategies in real time. Standardizing supply chain risk management methodologies across departments, subsidiaries, and external business partners ensures that vendor security policies are consistently applied, reducing exposure to third-party cyber threats and strengthening enterprise-wide supply chain resilience. By embedding supply chain cybersecurity governance into enterprise risk management strategies, organizations enhance third-party security assurance, improve regulatory compliance, and ensure sustainable supply chain cybersecurity risk management in an evolving global threat landscape. That wraps up today's discussion on framework. Don't stop here. Head over to cyberauthor.me to explore more cybersecurity topics and discover a best-selling book covering NIST and other critical cyber frameworks. Please like, rate, and review this episode on Apple and Spotify. Until next time, remember that knowledge is power.